Chairwoman, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. First, I would like to thank Merck and the organizing committee for inviting me to this Congress. And I also would like to apologize for not being able to share or to attend the Congress due to the complicated situation in my country. The title of my presentation is Ovulation Triggering Strategies, which is very close to my heart. 1 minute. So I have nothing to disclose. This slide, you can see the serum hormone level during the natural cycle, and you can see that during the mid-cycle, there is this LH peak, and concomitantly, there is also an FSH peak. During the stimulated cycle, there is, at the beginning, an increase in FSH level due to the exogenous administration of FSH, and then we have this HCG peak. HCG, as you all know, is a surrogate to the naturally occurring LH, and like LH, it induces luteinization of the granulosa cell, final follicular maturation, and resorption of meiosis. And nowadays, for final follicular maturation, we are usually triggered. It is usually triggered by one bolus of HCG, 5 to 10,000 units, that is administered as close as possible to the time of ovulation, mean 36 hours, but can do it between 34 to 38 hours. Now, you can see that during the mid-cycle, we have these three important hormones, the LH, the HCG, and the FSH. Now, let's see what is the role of this hormone during the mid-cycle. Here is the LH receptor, and you can see that when we are activating the LH receptor, we are activating actually several downstream cascades responsible for oocyte maturation, cumulus expansion, follicular rupture, and luteinization. And the first question is, what's happened when LH or HCG activate the receptor? Do they activate the receptor in the same way or in the same intensity? And to this question, the group of Simony has related. In this study, they used granulosa cell culture and added to the culture media HCG or LH and look quantitatively and qualitatively at different intracellular signaling. And as you can see here, when LH activates the receptor, it actually activates more intensely the cascade responsible for oocyte maturation, while when HCG is activating the receptor, it activates more intensely the cascade responsible for steroidogenesis. We repeated this study, but we use the same granulosa cell culture, but we add different mediator. We add HCG for the mimicking the ovarian stimulation cycle. We add LH and FSH to the media, actually mimicking the naturally occurring mid-cycle surge. And we also add HCG, FSH, and LH, which mimic what we are calling dual or double trigger that I will describe later. And we did it, and we looked at the expression of gene related to steroidogenesis, star and CHIP19, and follicular maturation, COX and amphiregulin. And as you can see in this slide, the best or the highest expression either of the steroidogenesis or the maturation pathway, where when we add all the three mediators, HCG, LH, and FSH, and the lowest expression was with HCG. You can see that opposite to the result of Simony, in our study, the addition of FSH and LH result in significantly higher expression of a steroidogenic hormone. We can explain that actually the addition of FSH potentiates the effect on LH on steroidogenesis, which is more pronounced than that of HCG alone. This is about HCG and LH. What about the FSH, the mid-cycle FSH surge that we are seeing during the natural cycle or following the GnRH agonist trigger? So to this question, the group of LAM has related. This is an RCT. Patient underwent the long GnRH agonist protocol, and they were triggered. The final follicular maturation trigger was with either HCG or HCG with 550 units of FSH. And as you can see here, those that received also FSH with the HCG trigger yielded significantly higher oocyte recovery rate, meaning that they had more oocyte per aspirated follicle, and also a significantly higher fertilization rate, actually confirming what we already know about the role of FSH surge, that it promotes formation of LH receptor, nuclear maturation, cumulus expansion, and etc. We have this LH surge, LHL is responsible, as you know, for assumption of oocyte meiosis, follicular rupture and oocyte expulsion, and luteinization. HCG and GnRH agonists can induce the final follicular maturation. HCG with the risk of OHSS and GnRH agonists without. And the next question is, what's about the number of oocyte and the percentage of mature oocyte? Are they the same when you're triggering with HCG and GnRH agonist trigger? So to this question, this RCTs has related, and you can see here the RCTs, and some of them relate to the biological parameter, the number of oocyte, M2 oocyte, percentage of M2 oocyte, and top quality embryo. And in this RCTs, they compared patients that were triggered with GnRH agonist alone or HCG alone. And as you can see in this table, when the effects are observed across studies, they're always in the same direction, meaning the same or an improvement when you're using GnRH agonist versus HCG. So GnRH agonist has a better effect or impact on the embryological parameter. So if this is the observation of the result, the next question is why not to use both of them, both HCG and GnRH agonists to trigger final follicular maturation. And this is a study by Lin. And now we're speaking about normal responders. So in this study, a retrospective study, normal responder patients were semi-randomized to either the standard trigger of HCG or the dual trigger, which is the decapeptyl or triptorelin 0.2 milligram a day plus 6,500 units of HCG. And as you can see here, when you're looking at the control versus the study group or the dual trigger group, the dual trigger group demonstrate a significantly higher oocyte retrieve. They had a significantly higher mature oocyte, no difference in top quality embryos, but the most importantly, they yield significantly higher live birth rate. This is the most important thing. An RCT by the clear, again, HCG versus dual trigger, 60 patients in each arm. As you can see here, the embryological parameters were not significantly improved, but when they looked at the other parameters, so in this study, the dual trigger group showed significantly higher number of patients with at least one top quality embryo and higher number of patients with embryo for cryopreservation. You have more embryo for cryopreservation, so it means that you probably have a highest cumulative pregnancy rate. And this is the first meta-analysis following all these first studies. 4 studies in this meta-analysis, they didn't demonstrate any difference in the embryological parameter, but they showed significantly high clinical pregnancy rate. Again, very small studies, only 4 studies, showing a tendency toward a better clinical pregnancy rate. And here, this is our study. This is a large RCT, double-blinded RCT study. Again, normal responder patient, good prognosis, undergoing up to their 3rd IVF cycle attempt. They were randomized to either HCG or HCG with GnRH agonist trigger. You can see here that the baseline characteristics are the same. The stimulation variable are the same. The only difference was the trigger. And when you're looking at the embryological parameter, actually all of them were significantly higher or better when you use the dual trigger, more oocyte, more mature oocyte, more blastocysts, more top quality blastocysts, and most importantly, significantly higher clinical pregnancy rate per transfer or per patient, and significantly higher live birth rate per transfer. Cumulative live birth rate was not significantly different. It was 50% more, but the sample size was not adjusted to answer this question. And here, again, more meta-analysis. This is the meta-analysis published in 2021. In this meta-analysis, you can see that when you compare dual trigger to HCG, significantly more oocyte collected, significantly more mature oocyte, more fertilized, more usable oocyte, and again, most importantly, significantly higher clinical pregnancy rate and a live birth rate. Another meta-analysis published this year in JARC, again, dual trigger versus HCG alone, significantly higher number of oocyte retrieved, significantly higher number of mature oocyte, significantly higher rate of biochemical pregnancy rate, and again, most importantly, significantly higher live birth rate. In this meta-analysis, they also looked at they did the subgroup analysis of fresh transfer versus frozen thawed transfer. So in the fresh transfer, there was significantly higher clinical pregnancy rate using the dual trigger. And in the frozen thawed transfer, actually, there was no difference because I believe that they used the same endometrial preparation protocol and used the best cryopreserved embryo. Why do I think that there is an improvement in or significantly higher live birth rate in the first cycle? Because the GnRH agonist has also beneficial effect on receptivity, as we know by the studies of Tezaric or the use of GnRH agonist during the luteal phase. So this is about normal responder. So normal responder, as you can see by now, with all these studies, RCTs, and meta-analysis, that normal responder may benefit from the dual trigger rather than HCG, with significantly better embryological parameter and significantly higher clinical and live birth rate, and possibly more even cumulative, because if they have more oocytes, more embryos, more top quality, they will probably have a significantly higher cumulative pregnancy rate. What about other group of patients? So this is a case report published in 2012. A very interesting case report coming from Israel. A patient with repeated empty follicle syndrome. She underwent 7 cycles with excellent embryological and ultrasonographic response, different protocol, different triggers, 0 oocytes. 0 oocytes. And then in the 8th cycle, they use this trigger, what we are calling the double trigger. The patient received GnRH agonist 40 hours before OPU. It was decapeptyl 0.2 milligram, and HCG 6,500 unit 34 hours before OPU. By doing this, they combine actually the advantage of both prolongation of the time between ovulation trigger and OPU to 40 hours, and also the GnRH agonist trigger with the consequent simultaneous induction of FSH surge, which is responsible for cumulus expansion and the releasing of the oocytes from the follicle. So in this 8th cycle, the patient actually achieved a lot of embryos, oocyte embryos, and also conceived. But when we saw this case report, we said, okay, if the double trigger is working so good in patient with this benign empty follicle syndrome, what not to use it in less severe form of final follicular maturation, of abnormal final follicular maturation. And the first subgroup of patient was the patient with low oocyte recovery rate. So when a patient achieved less than 50% number of oocytes per number of per-ovulatory follicle aspirated, in these cases, we offered the patient in the following subsequent attempt the double trigger. And then you can see here, there was no difference in ovarian stimulation variables. When we're looking at the embryological parameter, all the embryological parameters were significantly improved. More oocyte, more mature oocyte, more everything, more top quality with an acceptable clinical ongoing pregnancy rate. And this is for this subgroup of patients with low recovery rate. Another group of patients with abnormal final follicular maturation is those patients with a high proportion of immature oocyte. Patient with a lot of M1 or GV oocyte. In this case, the cutoff was 33%, and if patient had more than 33% GV and M1 oocyte, in the subsequent cycle, we offer her the double trigger, and again, same stimulation variables, and when you look at the embryological parameter, all of them were significantly improved with an acceptable live birth rate. So, in natural, a normal responder, we're using the dual trigger 36 hours before OPU. In those with abnormal final follicular maturation trigger, meaning those with low recovery rate or those with high percentage of immature oocyte, in this patient, we are offering the double trigger, not the dual trigger. We are triggering them with the GnRH agonist 40 or 42 hours before the OPU, and HCG 34 to 36 hours before OPU. And the last group of patients is the poor responders. So here you can see the Bologna criteria of poor responder. You should have 2 out of these 3 criteria. One criteria that went unnoticed in this Bologna criteria is the high prevalence of premature luteinization in these poor ovarian responders. how can we overcome this problem of high prevalence of premature utilization? We can do it by early trigger of final follicular maturation, meaning that when the follicle approach 15 or 60 millimeter, we can trigger it, or we can shorten the duration between the trigger and OPU, not 36, but 34 hours. The problem with these approaches is that we may decrease the percentage of mature oocytes. How to overcome this issue? Again, to use the double dual trigger in a patient with a window responder patient. This is our study. This is an RCT. It took us 3 years, complete years to recruit 30 patients, 10 patients in each arm. The arm were HCG trigger, GnRH agonist trigger with 1,500 units of HCG on the day of pickup, the Umedian style, and the double trigger 40 hours, 34 hours before retrieval. As you can see here, all the stimulation parameters were the same. We were significantly higher in the double trigger, and the ongoing pregnancy rate was not significantly higher. It's actually double than that of the HCG. Of course, the sample size was very small, and it was not adjusted to answer this question. I believe that if we could recruit 100 patients in each arm, also the clinical pregnancy rate ongoing in laboratory would be significantly higher. Another study, the same lean group that published the first retrospective study on dual trigger, they published now another retrospective study on dual trigger in poor responder. As you can see here, dual trigger in poor responder resulted in significantly higher fertilization rate, significantly lower cancellation rate, and significantly higher clinical pregnancy rate, black birth rate, and lower abortion rate. Another study published a year ago in human reproduction. This was again an RCT in patients with advanced age. Not all of them were poor responders. 3 arms: HCG arm, GnRH agonist arm, and a dual trigger arm. You can see here that all the baseline characteristics, stimulation characteristics were actually the same. When you're looking at the biological parameter of the outcome, so in those that were triggered with the dual trigger, they showed a significantly higher good quality embryo rate and number of viable embryo, actually repeating or mimicking our result, showing that using the double trigger, not the dual trigger, we have significantly a higher top quality embryo. And when they looked at the live birth rate, it was significantly higher in the dual trigger compared to the GnRH agonist trigger, and not significantly higher compared to the HCG trigger. Here again, in poor responder, we have also this meta-analysis. So in this meta-analysis, comparing dual to HCG trigger in poor responders, you can see that the implantation rate was not significantly higher. The pregnancy rate was actually almost significantly higher across the one, and live birth rate was significantly higher using the dual trigger versus the HCG trigger. And to summarize, actually we have these 3 groups of patients, or 4 groups of patients: the high responder, normal responder, abnormal, those with abnormal final follicular maturation, and those poor responder patients. In high responder, we're usually using the GnRH agonist trigger with a frisol. There are very few cases that those with the lower number of oocytes and no sign of OHSS on day 5, we might transfer 1 blastocyst with the addition of 1,500 units of HCG on the day of transfer of day 5. But usually, in most of the cases, we are triggering with GnRH agonists and frisol. In normal responder nowadays, we are triggering all these patients with the dual trigger, agonist, and HCG 36 hours before retrieval. Those with abnormal final follicular maturation, meaning those with low recovery rate or high percentage of immature oocyte, we are offering them the double trigger. GnRH agonist 40 hours and HCG 34 or 36 hours before retrieval, receiving excellent results. And in poor responders, there is a problem. In poor responder, the trigger actually differ between how we approach the patient at the end of stimulation. If we reach, the patient have a follicle of 15, 16 millimeter, in this case, we offer the double trigger, and we actually retrieving mature oocyte even from a follicle of 13 or 14 millimeter in diameter. If we reach the patient with a follicle of 18 or 19, in this case, if you use the double trigger, she will ovulate. So in this case, we are offering the dual trigger, but we aspirate the patient 34 hours before we trigger 34 hours before retrieval. This is actually what we are using nowadays. We're actually not tailoring the protocol, we're actually tailoring the trigger to the patient with actually an excellent results. Thank you for your attention.